On this episode of That's Montana, we're going to introduce you to Randy Hafer. Randy is with High Plains Architects out of Billings. He and the group he's surrounded himself with have done some pretty amazing things with Montana architecture. Not only new ideas, but taking the old and restoring it too. Randy, you're a multi-talented guy, besides being an architect. Give us a little history lesson on what shelter is all about as far as architecture is concerned.
Let's start biologically. Human beings are not designed to live out in the open. We're not deer, we're not fish. We require some form of shelter in order to live. Obviously, people die of exposure all the time, and what that simply means, of course, is that they're out in an open environment where they're subject to whatever the extremes and vagaries of the climate and the weather have to throw at them at that particular time. So the biology of us as beings is such that we need some kind of shelter just in order to live. That's how we evolved, and as societies developed over time, those shelters went from just protecting an individual kind of on a daily basis to having more specialized purposes. And human beings with our particular capacity to manipulate the environment have done that over a long period of time, to the point now where we can be pretty divorced from things around us. And I think that's an issue that we need to think about.
Randy, you've given us a good background and said we've got ourselves in kind of a predicament now because of cheap fuel. What lies ahead, and what are some of the things you're doing to maybe change that a bit?
I think ultimately this era that we're in is going to be called the age of unintended consequences, because oil has only been commercially produced since 1859, but that's 160 years, a very short period of time. And what we've really done in that period of time is taken tens of millions of years legacy of stored fossil fuels, and we've burned it all up. And then we don't think there's any consequences about that. Well, of course, there have been tremendous consequences, but one of them is that the society that we've built was dependent on the cheap aspect of this incredible energy source. So I think, and our firm thinks, that we need to do something about that. We need to be proactive rather than being a bunch of lemmings and just head for the cliff and march off with everybody else. So we really think that Montana is a great place to explore new ideas about how we as people can live comfortably on this planet without trashing this planet. And if we can do it in this place, which is, as I noted earlier, one of the most extreme climates on the planet, then there are lessons that can be used elsewhere. But the opportunities then are to try to figure out, take a look back at how did the Indians live in this place? How were they able to do that? Well, we're probably not going to live in teepees. However, there certainly are lessons that we can take from that experience, and we can also just really begin to pay attention to what does it mean that we have these temperature extremes. Sort of in a nutshell, what that means is insulation and ventilation. We're a climate that needs to be well insulated and that has to be able to open up and close down. That's sort of the basic lesson from the teepee. Insulated, ventilated. We do want to take advantage of the sunshine in the wintertime. We have quite a bit of sunshine in the wintertime. We're also in a northern latitude, which means we get to play with sun angles. So if we orient buildings, which is so simple, this doesn't cost any money. You just orient the building to take advantage of the sun. Our goal is now net zero energy, net zero water, net zero waste, simple, practical, affordable. So what does that mean? That means that we're going to not have to have any outside energy inputs in the form of gas or fuel oil. We're going to generate all of the electricity we need on site. It's a very exciting time, I think, to be exploring these ideas. The time is certainly right. It's been a quest that we've been on for a long time, but we're really thinking that we're having some success, but learning a lot in the process that are going to lead to some future successes that are really pretty exciting.
Give us some examples of some of these techniques that you're putting into use right now.
Okay, well, I can start with the Northern Plains Resource Council building. It started life as a 1940s concrete block neighborhood grocery store. It was built starting in 1940 but expanded during the war when materials were scarce. It was a very humble concrete block building, not particularly well built. It was pretty ugly, frankly. Well, we had a motivated, exciting, enlightened client. They are an environmental organization. They wanted to do a building that really reflects their values on a budget. So that ended up being the building that we worked with. So we didn't scrape it. We kept it. We transformed it completely and made it into a state-of-the-art, high-performance building. We transformed it into something that was very dark inside, into something that's light-filled, that's naturally ventilated, that's heated with radiant heat in the floor, that has lots of these opportunities for controlling the sun that I was talking about built into it. And it's turned out to really be a pretty remarkable space that I think the folks that work in that building are pretty happy with. We learned a ton doing that building. So Northern Plains really led to our office building. We were right across the street in a 1918 warehouse. At the time we did that building in 2001, we had incorporated radiant floor heating, evaporative cooling, additional insulation, improved windows. We thought we were really being pretty good. But we also realized after that building that we could do way better. So again, we were interested in walking our own walk and really pushing envelopes as hard as we could. So we came across the street. We decided that was too new and too nice for us. So we came across the street and went from 1918 to 1893 Saloon. And at the time that we bought this building, it was a brick tube. It had 4 brick walls and a roof. There was no floor that had rotted out and had been removed by the previous owner. So again, for us, part of the challenge is, can we take this thing that most people would say, you know, there's no value there, and can we make it into a state-of-the-art, high-performance building for less cost than it would take to tear it down and build new on this same site? Those were some of the goals. So again, we took lessons learned from the Northern Plains project, but we pushed further. In this building, we have our first rainwater collection system. And that was, again, something we'd been reading about, talking about, thinking about, haven't done one yet. Rainwater collection is one of those things that's certainly more art than science. It's not, you don't just go to a book and read this chapter and here you go. For one thing, huge number of variables involved. You've got all the vagaries of weather. Is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? When does it rain? How much does it rain? All those issues. Then, of course, you've got all the vagaries of the occupants. How do they use the water? How often do they have to go to the bathroom? All those kinds of things. So it's a very kind of scientific, arty thing to go through this analysis to figure out what that's going to mean. We did research. I've got lots of different ideas about how to approach this project and put a system together that ended up being a series of 3 1,200-gallon, very inexpensive plastic tanks combined with a pump and 2 filters, a particulate filter and an ultraviolet filter to kill pathogens, and created a system for moving the water from the back of the roof to these tanks in the crawl space. And it works. The thing worked. We haven't used city water since we turned that on. It's been almost 3 years now.
When we come back, Randy will explain more of the unique features of the High Plains Architects building.
Another one of the things that we're really interested in looking at, again, in this 1893 pretty humble saloon, we really wanted to see what we could do with natural light. Could we make this space work for us with natural light most of the time? So our one big intervention in this building was to put what we call a doghouse up on the roof, with the north side having 2 rows of skylights in it, the upper row of which operates, meaning they open, and then the south side of the skylight, which faces due south, became then a frame for mounting photovoltaic panels for generating electricity. So we took that one structure, which is the only thing we added to the building, and made it do 3 things for us. It generates electricity, provides natural light, and it also becomes part of our ventilation system. We also obviously opened up the front of the building, restored the storefront to as close as we were able to determine something similar to its original 1893 storefront, and we installed windows in the openings in the back of the building that had all been filled in. And the amazing thing is, we achieved that result too. So we have, the lights in the office are controlled by photosensors, which means that they're adjustable. We determine at what level we want them to then trigger the electric lights. So We come in the morning and flip the switch on, but the lights won't come on unless the light level gets to a point where the photocell will trigger that switch. So most of the time, most of the year, during the day, the lights in the office are not on. Now that's all interesting for a number of reasons too, because it turns out our eyeballs aren't, as a biological being, we're not required to have this constant uniform light level all the time, everywhere we go. And it just sort of re-engages us in our place because we're aware on some level of what's going on around outside. And it really just, it feels friendlier. It just feels kind of more alive and more engaged. And then another part of that system, as I mentioned, was that adding all the windows brought in natural light, but we also wanted to take advantage of those windows in the sense that if we make them operable, they can open and close, we could take advantage of natural ventilation opportunities. And so that just simply means let's let the sun and gravity move air. Just use the basic physics of convection currents. So the revelation here was that, again on our pup tent, those upper skylights all open. Well, that now creates a stack. It's a vertical differential between the low windows and the high windows. Now gravity can go to work because air that's warmer is less dense. It's up here. Air that's cooler is more dense, it's down here. But all you have to do if you've got less dense air up here is open this window up, and all of a sudden it wants out. And then the cooler air pours in at the bottom. So this has been, again, it's been incredible how well this has worked. We're right downtown. We're in the middle of the heat island, meaning we've got nothing but buildings and streets around us. So we open the building up first thing in the morning, and within minutes, literally minutes, we can flush the building out and get the inside temperature to whatever the outside temperature is between 7 and 8 in the morning, whoever's here first. That's great, and it's free, and it's very simple. When the inside temperature gets to about 78, which might happen 10, 11 in the morning, again, if it's going to be a hot day, we just simply close the windows and turn the ceiling fans on. So now we have cut off that outside air movement, but we've got an air temperature inside at about 78, and we turn our ceiling fans on, which just circulates, it moves air, just enough that we can feel it a little bit on your skin. And now, of course, the temperature outside continues to go up. By 3 in the afternoon, it might be 95 degrees. The temperature inside, because we are a well-insulated building, we have a white reflective roof, the temperature inside does come up, and when it gets to about 82, which is just sort of a magic number that we all physiologically respond to, it starts to feel too warm. So at that point, then we can turn on our evaporative cooler, which is pulling very hot, dry outside air through a sponge. Moisture evaporates, it humidifies and cools that air. We dump it down into the office, and we can drop the temperature in here when we turn that system on. Usually it takes 10 minutes maybe to drop from 82 to about 76. Very comfortable again. Keep the fans on, that sort of circulates and mixes the air, and we've got exhaust fans here at the back of the office to pull it out. But we only have to even run that system for a couple hours a day on the hottest days. And we're using rainwater, and it's from an energy standpoint, it's about 80% more efficient than a conventional air conditioning system to begin with, and there's virtually no ductwork associated with it. So it was a very inexpensive system to put in, it's a very inexpensive system to operate, and we don't even have to operate it very much, and the water we're collecting for free.
When we come back, Randy will tell us about some unique things that he does with electricity, and also gives us a look in the crystal ball of what he sees for architecture in Montana in the future. Let's talk about electricity.
Let's talk about electricity, because electricity turns out to be a pretty fun thing. Obviously, there's lots we can do with electricity in terms of work, in terms of running things, lights, all kinds of our computers and all kinds of equipment. They all need electricity to work. But the other thing that's really great about electricity is we can generate it from the wind, or we can generate it from the sun. Neither one of those systems is putting harmful pollutants in the air as they're doing their work of generating electricity. So we had done a photovoltaic system at the Northern Plains project. We wanted to try one here to really live with it, to see how it worked, to see what it does for us. And so we put a small 2 kilowatt system up on the roof. It wasn't particularly expensive, and with the Northwestern Energy rebates and tax credits, it was actually very inexpensive. It's a grid-tied system, meaning that the electricity that we generate on the roof is tied through a meter into the utility grid. We feed backwards if we're generating more than we need at any given time, and we pull off the grid when we're not generating enough or at night. But again, it's one of these systems that kind of like the water and the ventilation and so forth, that when you get involved with this, you start paying more attention to things. Like, has it been cloudy all week? Has it been sunny all week? So we monitor. We've got a little reader outside we can look at. We monitor the total energy we've consumed every week as compared to the amount of energy that we've generated every week. And as it turns out, we, on an average annual basis, it's close to 30% of our total. But in the course of just paying attention to that system and how much energy we use every week, how much we generate every week, it starts to get us to think about how much are we using every week in terms of activities in the office, and do we need to have that thing on all the time? Or, gee, even when we leave, if everybody turns their computer off, there's still some little lights glowing. There's some small amounts of energy that are dripping away to keep that stuff going. Is that really necessary? So we did some things in here which turned out to be sort of these behavior things that are kind of interesting. We put the water cooler circuit on a switch. Just turn it off at night, because it turns out we don't need cold water in the middle of the night. We put the computer circuits on switches because we don't really need those little lights glowing at night. That's not doing anything for us. So you start to become aware of it's like the leaky faucet. The only difference is it's not making any noise, and so you're not driven to distraction by the fact that there's that dripping is kind of killing you. But we've sort of become sensitive to the little lights, and they're sort of the same thing. And when you become aware that all those little lights are really just drip, 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 and we're paying for that, we've started to think about ways to avoid having to pay for that. And it turns out it's not so difficult. But it does mean that we just don't take everything for granted, that we don't just assume that everything is about automation and a switch and you turn it on and everything somehow takes care of itself. That can happen. That's enormously energy consumptive. And it's also enormously complicated and expensive. And that's really part and parcel of this whole problem that we're dealing with. If energy's not cheap, that sort of lifestyle where you just, forget it. We're just disconnected from everything, and is not going to work. It's going to become too expensive. It's too much of a burden. It really doesn't make any sense. But it turns out that by doing these other things, really, it's a better way to live. It's a way less expensive way to live. And we're finding that these systems that we're talking about are not complicated. They're actually very simple. We think those things are important. And that's kind of what we're learning as we're going along here, that simple is good. So going back to this notion of the net zeros and then simple, practical, affordable, the simple is really key, because if we can figure out how to live simply, still comfortably, but simply, then the practical and affordable come along with that. It's just such a much better way to go. We're not so vulnerable to things that we don't have any control over. And the huge vulnerability that we're all subject to right now is the end of cheap energy, the cheap fossil fuel energy. And even frankly, if it was still cheap, we've created all these other problems because of it. We only have one planet. We really should be thinking a lot more about how to take care of it.
What kind of legacy do you see down the road?
Well, I mentioned this earlier, but we love Montana. We really think Montana is the last best place. But we want to leave it as the last best place, not the last place that was best. And we think there's just a tremendous opportunity to do that here. We think we're having some good success in learning how to become a really integrated part of this place rather than just something else that moved in here and extracted and left. I think this is the place that we have the best chance to do something right as we move forward, so that we can live in a manner that is comfortable, that is a good quality of life, but in a way that is light on the land, that is of the place, then hopefully we've done something positive for the whole planet. And since we know that Mother Nature bats last, we want to make sure that we're in the right position to come home and score when she bats and not just get thrown out. So that's kind of where we'd like to end up.
Well, that puts a wrap on this episode of That's Montana. We'd like to thank Randy Hafer and the talented group of architects that he's gathered at High Plains Architects in Billings to show us how you can take the old and make something very new. And don't forget, you can visit our website at www.thatsmontana.com and leave us your thoughts about our programs on our Facebook page. We'll see you next Sunday on That's Montana.